Namaste and welcome to this afternoon's Vichar Manthan. My name is Sachin Nanda and I will be the chair for this afternoon's Vichar Manthan. Now, this Vichar Manthan is quite a special 90-minute session that we have in store for you. We have two wonderful expert witnesses and we will be exploring India's farm laws. What do we really understand about these laws, their implications, and what the future holds for them? Usually, Vichar Manthan, VM for short, represents and explores challenges facing British society through a Hindu civilizational lens. Vichar meaning ideas, Manthan meaning to churn. So VM for short never ever tries to give you the perfect answer. Never does it preach the perfect solution. Our aim is to present rigor, present facts, present questions, and hopefully give you the opportunity to manthan for yourself the intricacies of any challenge that our society faces. Now, usually we are very British focused, but today we make an exception. We will be looking at India's farm laws. Why? Well, many of you would have noticed, many of you tuning in most certainly would be well aware that if you were to look at the social media handles germinating out of the West, particularly the United Kingdom, you would think that depending on which side of the spectrum you are on, you would think that half of the country is up in arms about these land reforms, that there are human rights violations happening without any accountability by the government, and that this is becoming a hot human rights issue, not just for farmers, but for other communities across India. Now, that affects us because we are, and there is a large, vibrant, progressive Indian diaspora in the United Kingdom. This diaspora is successful by any measure. And so inevitably, naturally, they're going to care about what happens to India, which is the roots of the culture and from where they come. So it is inevitable that we have to tackle and explore this particular issue earnestly and in a sense of, with a sense of rigor and objectivity. So with me to explore this most complicated of all issues, there is nothing simple as far as I can see about this issue. I have two wonderful witnesses with me who understand the situation and who have commented widely on this particular issue. First, we have Colonel Jabins Singh, a retired colonel from the Indian Army. Jabins Singh, namaste. Jabins Singh is a defense and corporate management and communications expert. He has a postgraduate in journalism and mass communications. He has a management degree from the prestigious Indian Institute of Management. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. But first, I also have with me Abhijit Mitra. He has been on Vichar Manthan before, and sorry about that. So Abhijit works for the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. He's a senior research fellow. His specialty is in nuclear security programs. He deals with defense issues, economics, governance issues, and non-traditional security threats. So Abhijit, welcome and namaste to Vichar Manthan. Jabins ji, namaste. Welcome to Vichar Manthan, both of you.
Thanks for having me, Sachin.
Wonderful to have you both. So what we're going to do is we're going to go straight into this issue. And what I would request, Abhijit, if we start with you first, your opening remarks will be for 8 minutes, and then Jabins ji will come to you with the second round. In your opening remarks, Abhijit ji, if you can answer this question for me, are India's land reform bills just? Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sachin. So that's such a black and white question. And I always got told that, academics is exploring the shades of gray, but policy always has to be black and white because you can't have, it's either guilty or not guilty. You can't have, I don't know as a verdict. So, in balance, I'll say they're just. But to give you the academic nuance behind it, we need to understand that agriculture in Punjab or economic policy in Punjab has been a series of stopgap measures that have kind of accumulated into a big catastrophe. So what these laws did was something that had to be done. Let me start off with whatever happened. You first had the so-called land reforms that happened in the early 50s and 60s. And they weren't actually land reforms, they were tenancy reforms. And what you basically had was a certain set of dominant castes effectively go out and grab a lot of lands owned by Dalits and things like that. In many ways, if you look at the economic history of Britain, this would be like the 16, 17, and 1800s, where the lords and the barons kind of monopolized. They first would fence off, and then they would go and monopolize the commons, which would be used for grazing and things like that. It was very similar to that process. But this was also a time when India as a country constantly fought famine, because famine was ever present. We were literally a beggar state constantly. We didn't know hand to mouth existence. We didn't know where our next crop was going to come from, where our next meal was going to come from, and things like that. And so you have something called the Green Revolution that happens. And what the Green Revolution does is it brings in a shorter variety of crop, which takes a shorter growing period. And consequently, you can produce more because the crop growing season is shorter and things like that. So you can harvest a lot more as well. And what ends up happening is that in the process, we had close to about 50,000 domestic varieties of seed, wheat, rice, everything. And all that sort of food security in terms of genetic diversity got lost in that process. We still haven't been able to recover them. We've only been able to recover about 1,000, 2,000 of those seed varieties right now. Now, the next problem that this created was that you had an extensive use of fertilizers. And this was very similar to what happened with the Aswan High Dam, which kind of had huge knockdown effects on both Upper and Lower Egypt, because it was built somewhere where Nubia would be in ancient Egypt terminology kind of thing. So what you end up seeing is that because of the fertilizers, Punjab has also turned into a cancer belt. It has one of the highest instances of cancer anywhere in India, mostly because of these phosphate and other chemical fertilizers that they're using. So you've had that. The third aspect of this was that even within Punjab, you have two different economic belts in that sense. The north is much more prosperous, the south is much, much poorer. And then what happened was sometime around the 80s, they got in the system that because rice was booming, they wanted to encourage everybody to start growing rice as well. This was a wheat belt. This isn't like China's divided into the north, the wheat noodle belt, and south, the rice belt. It's something similar here as well. They wanted to, this was a wheat belt, and they wanted to introduce rice as a crop. Now, wheat was grown here because it's the natural crop to grow. You can't just bring in a water-intensive crop like rice out here without significant consequences. And what has since happened out there, and this coincided with another one of our brilliant socialist ideas, which was planting eucalyptus trees like crazy in that area. And for anybody who doesn't know about eucalyptus, it is an invasive foreign species from Australia. And you go to a swamp and you plant a eucalyptus tree. Within the space of about a year or 2 years, that swamp will be completely dry. That is the level of ecological damage eucalyptus causes. So between eucalyptus and rice, you've had such extraordinary damage to the water table in Punjab that you're looking at a complete drying up of the water table in another 10 to 15 years. In terms of the law, what this did was that to encourage people to grow rice. So remember, these things only come about since the 1980s or so. Uh, you told them that, look, don't worry, as a kind of security system, as a fallback guarantee, almost as an employment guarantee, you grow rice, and we're going to give you something called a minimum support price, an MSP. So what happens with the MSP is it's very attractive. People start moving towards rice. The problem is the rice is highly variable because it's grown, and I'm not going to get into the land holding patterns out here because they are crazy. You will have tiny, tiny little land holding patterns, maybe like a townhouse. Some of them are as small as a townhouse in Mayfair. They're literally, some of them are that small. Uh, and yet they will, use the MSP to grow their rice and sell it to the government for a sort of guaranteed whatever. Now, the problem here is that it led to a decrease in crop diversity as well. And the problem then again was that you had to resort to a lot of slash and burn farming, and that combined rice with sugarcane. There were all kinds of crop mixtures. And what happened was you started having these huge fog blankets over North India, where the burning was effectively leading to pollution we've never heard of in India. To the extent that a Delhi pollution tracker, the maximum you can go up to is about 999. And this would go over 1,000. We don't even know how much over 1,000. It could be 1,200, it could be 1,500. And that is like literally living in sort of carcinogen central, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to use that term gas chamber because it has all kinds of connotations, but it really was that. You ask any of the diplomats who live in Delhi, for them, winter is like, oh my God, let's get all the kids out. Anybody who can afford it just goes up to the hills but most of the people can't. And remember, this belt is also your economically most productive belt. So you had a very small interest group which was producing crops that simply weren't suited for that region, causing a lot of ecological damage to their own ecosystem, primarily to correct mistakes of the past. And something had to be done. So what these laws did was they introduced lots of things. They brought in kind of like an employment guarantee, which says, look, we need you to go out and look for jobs. We're going to introduce you to an employment exchange, essentially. These private sector guys want to buy from you. Why don't you grow the crops that these guys want you to grow? If you can't, we will continue to run these trade fairs, if you want. They're not trade fairs. They're like your Sunday market kind of thing, where you can go buy bric-a-bracs and things like that. But essentially an agricultural Sunday fair where you are guaranteed your minimum support price. Right now, the system was the farmer did not have a choice. The farmer can't choose what he or she grows. They have to grow whatever they want as per MSP, and they don't have a choice to sell it where they want to sell it. They have to go to these trade fairs called mandis and sell it there at MSP. They're lucky if they get more than what they're meant to get. Mostly they don't, so they get an absolute minimum support price. So now when you want to introduce a system which says, try something else for your own good, see if you can make more money, they don't want it. Now, you have to understand why some people don't want it. And this is very, very important we understand this.
Abhijit, if I can just get you to sum up as well. So if you can tell us about this and then sum up.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So through the 80s and 90s, we had a huge terrorism problem in Punjab. And it skipped the industrialization, partial industrialization that the rest of India witnessed through the 90s. So it remained a very agrarian economy. And the choices there are extremely limited. So what's happened, to sum up, is that you're looking at a confluence of lots of different difficult situations. And the current legislation is to basically open up. It stops the farmer from being bonded labor. It also removes the power given to these Sunday fairs, the mandis, because they are the main tool of political funding in Punjab. And there are only two poles there to fund. And there is no industry to give you money either. That. And the third was to an ecological angle, which was in 15 years, there will be no crops in Punjab if the current agricultural patterns continue. So you will take an agricultural state and you will turn it into a desert because the water only lasts for 15 more years maximum. So it was all these things that had to come together, which is what these laws basically do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that clarity. Um, I mean that what you've described there of the ecological and the lack of industrialization that's happened in that part of the world is something that we here in Britain just don't appreciate, and I don't think we even understand it, if I'm honest with you. But thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is in our month and later, I'm going to come and try and push back and maybe even try and unpick some of the things that you were talking about. I think because they're very, very important. What I want to do bring right now, however, is I want to bring our second expert witness to make his opening remarks, Colonel Jabin Singh. Colonel, you are a retired colonel from the Indian Army, but of course you are a journalist. Your family comes from the Punjab, and you have roots on the ground. So the question for you in your opening remarks, the 8 minutes for you, Colonel, is: are these protests that we are seeing, are they just? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sachin. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you on Punjab Vichar Manthan today. And after what Abhijit has said about Punjab, I think it was very, very exhaustive and very well informed. I must compliment him for that. And not much is left for me to say. However, you see, Sachin, the moment I start speaking here, I'm going to start getting trolled all over the place for being a lackey of somebody and things like that. But I want to make it very clear that I'm totally apolitical and a soldier of 4 generations. And for me, the safety, honor, and welfare of my country comes always first in every time. And I'm a strategic analyst. Of course, I have a lot of love for Punjab, so that makes me get involved in that place. But Punjab itself has got a strategic connotation for the entire South Asia region as well as the world, being a border state with inimical forces right on the doorstep. So what I'm going to say is against the background of this introduction that I have given to you, and it's very simple, but coming from me, it has a different connotation. You have heard what I'm going to say many times already, I'm sure. So India, as you know, Sachin, is the largest democracy in the world and the most vibrant also. And it has got very well established parliamentary processes. And these 3 farm laws have been passed by due parliamentary process in a very legal and a justified manner after a long-standing debate, and a debate which has been carried out across so many political parties. So there is no point in saying that there has been no debate on these laws. Second point is that in a democracy like India, the right to protest is a hallmark. And as these laws have been passed, there are certain segments in our farming society who have a few apprehensions. And for these apprehensions, they are protesting. So it is totally justified. It is something that we would have wanted to happen so that we could find out if there are any loopholes in the laws. And this protest is very, very peaceful. It is an acceptable activity. So with these protests starting, the government immediately got into motion and started calling the leaders over for discussions to find out what was wrong. And there was a very serious engagement between the farm leaders and the government, which led to 11 rounds of talks. And these have been carried out by the government representatives at the highest level. A solution has been around the corner for many times, but due to certain inhibitions, it could not come by, and also due to certain other people getting involved, extraneous agencies getting involved in the protest. As far as I know, I'm concerned, I am absolutely certain that the talks have reached a point of solution, and it is just a matter of time when the solution is going to come out and the government is addressing it in the very right manner. So it is something that one should not be really very worried about. Secondly, we come to the point of media that you have spoken of. Yes, there is very sensational coverage to these protests, as there is sensational coverage to everything which is happening in India. I would, by the conservative media, and of course, there is tremendous traction all the time in social media. So this has painted a very negative picture of the situation, where there was no need for such negativity to come in, and certain powers and certain forces have started taking undue advantage of the same. The fact of the matter, Sachin, as I see it, is that India is very well placed, and it is well within the capacity of this country, with its well-rooted traditions and democratic systems, to find out what is in the best interest of everybody, and especially the farmers. Because, I mean, it would be rather silly to think that any government in India or any political party in India can survive by going onto the wrong side of the farmers. So definitely this government or any other government and any other political party will like to ensure that nothing of this sort happens in India. So, therefore, this very peaceful protest and this manner in which the whole matter is being dealt with in the country is, I think, quite exemplary, and it should, in fact, be looked upon by the rest of the world as something that they have not seen earlier. You see, the protest is so peaceful, Sachin, except for that one aberration which happened in the Red Fort for a little while, and which was also handled by the government with extreme maturity, and it continues to be handled with extreme maturity. There has not been a single, violent incident as far as these protests are concerned. So that is something which I think the international community and India should appreciate, rather than getting after us that as if India is going to get into tatters in the next 10 minutes or something of that sort. After having said this, my next point that I want to make is that we, the people of Punjab, living in Punjab, we have got a tremendous amount of respect and regard for all our such brothers and sisters who have opted to settle in foreign shores. A lot of them are from my family also. Lot kya. Most of my family is abroad, and some are in UK also. And we are very proud of their achievements. But the fact is that they have chosen to leave India. And they should, I feel, at this point of time of having made a choice, they should divert their loyalty and energy towards the country of their choosing and its development. They should leave India, which is a very mature country, a very old country, a very vibrant democracy, a huge power in the international framework, to work out its own problems itself and look at their life the way they have tried to make it. In India, we are very capable of preparing ourselves for the new life which has to come in. So we should be allowed to deal with our own issues. I can well understand what the people outside feel. You see, being in the army, I have also lived away from my family and my house for years and long periods of time. So whenever there is a problem, you obviously you start getting a bit worried about the problem, how it is going to deal and what is happening behind. There is a lot of insecurity. I have faced it all my life. But now that these my brothers and sisters and my children abroad who have planned to settle over there, they should learn to fight with this insecurity also. They should have at least that much of confidence in the people behind, that they will be able to deal with the issues the way they're supposed to be dealt with. So overall, I think the manner in which the situation has been painted is rather off the mark. And it should not have been the way it is, especially coming from foreign countries, to whom I would request that they should desist from unnecessarily interfering with the affairs over here in India. And as far as what Abhijit has said, it is just for Punjab. These laws are meant for the entire country, and there are other people also who have apprehensions. People in Haryana, people in Rajasthan, some people in UP, and there are certain apprehensions that are there in Maharashtra also, Gujarat also. And PM Modi has very forthrightly said in Parliament that look, we are not saying that these laws are the end all of everything. We want dissent to come in, we want articulation to come in, and if there is any problem, we will be the first people to resolve that problem. He has made the statement in Parliament. So I think we should go by these 3-4 points that I have said and not get worried too much. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Colonel. So look, I mean, I think what we have to do now is I would like to bring you both onto the platform, and I want to spend the next 25, 30 minutes really unpicking and going as deep as we can and unpicking some of the things both of you have just said. And you know, forgive me, but I am surrounded here with pieces of paper, with notes, with reports, with statistics right in front of me. So I'm going to try and hopefully in some sort of coherent manner unpick this with you. Okay. So the first thing I want to come to is, I suppose, the kind of this notion of the bills. Okay. Let's talk about these bills to begin with. What is the nature of the three bills? My understanding is there are three bills. The first bill effectively allows farmers choice, which I think, Abhijit, you picked up on in your opening remarks. The second bill is about the remunerative prices and how the pricing mechanisms work for these farmers. And the third is effectively about creating better efficiencies and barriers, a barrier-free agricultural market. Who would like to have the first go at sort of just explaining to our audience what are these three bills? Abhijit, do you want to have a go first? And then Jabanji, if you want to come in and give us your narrative on how the farmers have responded. So you mentioned in your opening remarks, Jabanji, that there were some anxieties that are perfectly legitimate. So if you could tell us about what those legitimate anxieties are. So Abhijit, if you go with explaining the bills, and then Jabanji, if you come in after.
Sure. Just to explain the bills, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief little background to this. Like Jaibansji mentioned, there are anxieties throughout because, let's face it, the government's done an absolutely atrocious job of explaining this. There was a 2-year-long consultative process. But, after you consult, you also have to sit down and do the community outreach, which really wasn't done. And it was really mucked up quite badly. But we've seen that happen all the time. And we also need to understand why this is strongest in Punjab and slightly less in Haryana and UP. Punjab, as I explained in my opening remarks, has a very deep economic tie to that entire mandi system, the trade fair system in that sense. In Haryana, the problem right now is that you have the dominant caste there is the Jats. You have a non-Jat Punjabi chief minister, and the Jat Pa coteries there are out to screw him over. And in UP is an extension of that Jat belt because there are three contiguous states. Right. Rajasthan, again, has a significant Jat population. So, it's like in any pre-industrial society, and people tend to forget India is still an agricultural pre-industrial society, kinship, because there's so much uncertainty. Kinship is a very, very important thing. So just keep that in the back of the mind. So the first bill was the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion Bill, which what it did was it gave the choice to the farmers that you can either sell, you can negotiate directly with traders and so on and so forth. And you choose what the crops are. If you don't manage to do that, we will still come and, you can still come to the mandis and get your minimum support price out there. And the main thing about this was, they've tried this. They've actually, you might ask, why didn't the government start up mitigation measures? Maybe grow high value crops that you could export, like what Israel does with kibbutzes, say artichokes or asparagus or things like that. They did try that. The problem was that the last mile road connectivity and the cold storage chains simply don't exist. So, and there was no economic case for it, so it never worked out. So it was sort of this sort of mild, you try it, let's see what happens, let's create an economic case where a private builder has enough incentive to build a cold storage chain, to build last mile connectivity, and kind of semi-permanent roads up to your farm and things like that, and then it'll take off. The second bill was the Farmers Empowerment and Protection, and that gave them protections when they enter into a business, into a contract with a big business. It gave them certain protections because there is this fundamental belief, and it's only right, that a tiny landowner will not be able to hold his own against an industrial conglomerate, an agricultural industrial conglomerate, which would then screw him or her over. And that is a very legitimate concern. And I think they could have maybe dealt with it better, come up with kind of unionized bargaining and things like that. But it is what it is. And that's what this bill did. It gave them certain legal protections. Again, the government hasn't gone around explaining that to the people either. The third was the Essential Commodities Act. And the Essential Commodities Act was basically, it's a hangover from the period of famines we spoke about, where because you were always on the brink of famine, the government had to stock up huge quantities of grain and basic essentials like, say, onions or oil seeds, potatoes, just high starch and essential commodities that you could, if famine struck, you could give it out immediately. And just to contextualize this, I want to point you to the last famine that happened in Bangladesh, which was in 1973-74, after the liberation of Bangladesh. What happened was that even before the government of Bangladesh, the newly independent Bangladesh, knew there was a famine, about 1 million people had died from starvation. So these things happen so quickly. The government mechanism doesn't, or didn't, in the 70s, couldn't pick it up that quickly. Today, of course, social media is very different. So you do have that cushion. And that's why they wanted to get rid of these stockpiles that they maintain, for very good reason. Because remember, Sachin, the problem here is we lose $14 billion a year of agricultural produce to rot.
14 billion.
14 billion, 14 billion United States dollars to rot every year. Goodness. Right? Because it's just stored out there. You have rats that eat through and, essentially infected with leptospirosis, in which case the whole thing is gone. And
so let me just come in
transporting
there.
it to the markets, it rots.
Right. So let me just come there. So Jabans G, if you can come in here, what is the concern? From the way Abhijit explains that, it seems perfectly rational and reasonable that India should move in that direction. And okay, it may not be perfect, but it's a big country and they're kind of trying to do the right thing. So what are the legitimate concerns that you know that the farmers have regarding these three bills? If you could take us through it step by step.
Look, Sachin, firstly, Abhijit said something about outreach, that the government has not come in for outreach. I have an opinion on this. This particular government in India today has got an absolute majority, and it has got very less opposition in parliament. So with the result that whether it has an outreach or it does not have an outreach, whether it tries to discuss a particular point or it does not discuss a point, the moment it takes a decision, the only option which is available with the opposition is to go to the streets. And that is what they have been doing all this while. They do not have any option. They do not have the option. So you can keep discussing this bills or anything else that the government wants to do till the cows come home in the parliament. It's not going to make any difference because the opposition strength to scuttle the process or anything of that sort. So these bills have been discussed extensively over so many years in the country, not only by the present government, by the previous governments. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has been speaking about them earlier, for whom I have got a great amount of regard, being an economist and things like that, apart from being a prime minister. So these bills have been discussed very extensively. In fact, most of the things that the present government has done are things which the Congress wanted to do, and they did not have that
Right. So, James, I think we may have just lost you there. Hopefully, we'll get you back. Uh, my understanding there, I picked up on, was that he said that actually previous governments had also been lobbying for this exact set of changes to the land reform bill. So let me get this straight. So effectively, these are not new things that this government has done. These are old things that they have just implemented because they have the mandate by the people to do so. Is that what he was telling us, Abhijit?
That is exactly what it is. In fact, these three bills, the initial drafts of them, which weren't very different from what they are right now, were Congress drafts. That's the
Right,
most amusing part of it,
right,
right?
right, right.
So,
So
and they,
one of the things I want to pick up though is he mentioned that look, it's kind of difficult to, and we are just, by the way, for those of you who are watching, we are trying to get the Colonel back in on the Vichar Manthan, so just bear with us. But we're in good company with Abhijit in the meantime. So one of the things, Abhijit, is look, I want to know what are the legitimate concerns of farmers? What is it that they are really worried about? What is it?
right. So there's several concerns. The first is the sort of middleman trader group who who do have a livelihood, which you have to respect, who have kind of lost out on it. The second are the absentee landlords. So many of the protester leaders, not the actual protesters, do come from those groups. Unfortunately, because they're the educated ones with money power, they're the ones who speak and become the face of the group, which, I think is grossly unfair to the farmers who are protesting. With the actual farmers, if you actually read both their versions, I mean, we don't have readouts of these negotiations. Unfortunately, we only have press reports and what the ministers and then the farm leaders put out on Twitter. If you go by what they're saying, there are a lot of apprehensions. They're not able to pinpoint things very specifically. They want a guarantee from the government saying, we're not going to get rid of MSP. Right. That's the one concrete thing that I've been able to pinpoint. And the government saying, look, we're not going to give you that guarantee that we won't get rid of minimum support price, because what happens if these market reforms take off? And
Right.
all of you are then perfectly okay. We can't run an entire system like this just for one or two people here or there. The
Understood.
economies of scale have to work.
Right, right, which is understandable. We've got Jabins G back. Jabins G, I hope you can hear me. Welcome back. Jabins G, Abhijit was just filling in and
Yes,
just
yes,
covering
yes.
some of the concerns, the legitimate concerns that farmers have. And he just mentioned that actually one of the things is this issue of MSP, that they want absolute guarantee that this MSP will not disappear. And of course, the government won't give that guarantee because, as Abhijit just said, that effectively, if the market conditions take off, then this MSP is basically irrelevant. Are there any other genuine concerns that you have picked up that the farmers actually have? So what are some of the legitimate concerns? James G, can you hear me? No, Abhijit Ji, it looks like it's just you and I again, I'm afraid. Sorry, carry on. You were going to your second point.
Right. And the second part of this is, remember, the refusing to guarantee the MSP, from what I've been hearing from a lot of ministers in private, is they are seriously worried about the ecocide that's happening out there. That's been an extremely important driving factor in them saying, we can't give you MSP because we just can't afford to have rice being grown out there. It has to stop because, look, if desertification happens, you're looking at an agricultural state. This would be like the Bronze Age collapse in that sense,
Right.
1177 BC kind of thing. You can't afford it. You can't afford desertification of your breadbasket effectively. So this has been a very important concern of the government. The problem is, remember, there are so many farmers who are invested in this. Change is always extremely scary. For some of us, we can take the risk when we uh, and I bet you most of the people watching Vichar Manthan, we come from a certain financial security where we can say, you know what, I'm going to give up my job and go take up farming artichokes in Surrey or something like that. These people
Absolutely.
can't.
Absolutely. One of the problems we have, Abhijit ji, is that in the UK, our knowledge comes from 140 characters or 200 characters or whatever it is. And we get bombarded with it. And we get these emotive images coming at us day in, day out, right? And you can't help but buy into them. I mean, it's perfectly human and natural. It's kind of clickbait, but it's all one way. And so when you say these things, you're talking about basically what you're telling me, and let me just caricature it a little bit and then shoot me down if you think I'm wrong. Effectively, what you're saying is unless the physical structure, the social economic structure of agriculture changes for the Punjab, you are going to see a massive desertification of one of the most greenest states in India. You're going to see something like 50% of the workforce unable to make a livelihood off the land because they have effectively destroyed it. Is that what you're telling us?
Exactly. And this applies to all the interest groups we spoke about. The middlemen, the absentee landlords, and the actual small farmers who have the least to gain in all of this.
Wow. Okay. All right. So then, so the concerns are just around the MSP. Is that what the concerns are? Now that I can understand, because if I come from a socialistic state where I'm always given the safety net, and all of a sudden there is even a hint that my safety net might be taken away from me, I'm going to be pretty nervous, especially if I'm already, as you said, pretty much just living on the line. I know I'm on the breadline, literally on the breadline. And now you're going to take that safety away from me. Oh my God, what will happen to my family? That to me seems very legitimate.
It is very legitimate, which is why you look at the government's response. It's been fairly measured. Now, the last time there was a protest, which I disagreed with, which was India Against Corruption, which was led by Arvind Kejriwal and other people, Baba Ramdev and things like that, under the Congress government in 2013, I think it was. They sat at a pre-designated protest site. It wasn't disruptive. Here, these are farmers, they're boisterous people. I mean, if you go to the Punjab, you realize it's all about fun, games. It's like a robust society which enjoys itself. It's known for being rough and tough kind of thing. They got a bit enthusiastic the first time round with their blockades. The second time, they got a bit enthusiastic with uprooting telephone poles of one of these companies, Reliance. And then they realized Reliance had sold off all those telephone poles to a Canadian company. So they stopped uprooting them immediately. And the third one, again, we need to remember, there were some rotten apples in this. The majority of these protests are legitimate, like we discussed, but you have a lot of rotten apples here and there. And the problem with rotten apples is you have other, rent seekers in that sense, piling onto it for their own relevance. Several people have, several of the opposition parties have, because they've tried their best to get rid of the so-called Modi wave in Indian electoral politics, and they've failed. Khalistan is one of them. Yes, I use the K word. I know it's taboo, but we probably need to discuss it as well. They've all been trying to latch on. And the problem is, abroad, the narrative is that this is a movement for Khalistan and things like that. That is not the way farmers here see it.
Right. Now that's fascinating.
It's about their rights.
So I just want to bring in the Colonel back in. Colonel Jabins G, are you able to hear us?
Yeah.
Wonderful, great. Let's get the three of us back on. So I'm glad you can join us. Thank you to the tech team for fixing this. Jabins G, we've just gone through some of the legitimate concerns that the farmers have, and we've just discussed that. And Abhijit Ji has just brought up that, look, these concerns are legitimate and the government is responding maturely, is what Abhijit kind of said. I just want to round that particular issue up before moving on to the next one, which is, from your perspective, I'd like to hear, do you think the government is responding to the legitimate concerns of the farmers appropriately enough?
Yes, Sachin. Firstly, what Abhijit had said about any point in time coming when the government cannot give the minimum support price, The Prime Minister has personally given a guarantee that minimum support price is there. It will continue. So you have to look at it the larger picture that the government itself is honor bound to buy a lot of grain for its own programs of public distribution system, as well as for other states which are non-grain growing states. So the purchase by the government is going to carry on.
Right.
So to say this, that there will be no MSP would not be making a very correct statement. And the mandis which are there, the APMCs, they will keep functioning. The APMC is the Agriculture Produce Market Committee mandis. They will keep functioning as they are functioning. The rest of it is going to come alongside it. You know, the best part about these bills is that they are not, I mean, if you have a bill, a legislation, it says you will do this, you will not do that, you will do this, you will not do that. As far as these bills are concerned, they say you can do this also, you can do that also. You can buy from here, you can sell in the mandi, you can sell outside. So they are not putting any restriction on the farmer.
So if I can just come in and if I can ask my tech team to put all three of us onto the panel so that the audience can see all three of us, because I think all of our reactions are important for people to see. Jayabhuji, I want to continue with what you've said. If that is the case, why is it that after 11 rounds of negotiations, effectively what I'm understanding is that the people who represent the farmers, now firstly, I want you to tell us who is representing the farmers and are they legitimate, right? Like do they really represent the common farmer from Punjab or Haryana or wherever? And why is it that they are asking for the complete revocation of these laws? Like lock, stock and barrel, they are saying, we don't want to talk, we want you to remove them. So what's happening there?
Should I give an answer for this? Okay,
yes, please.
Fine.
Yes, please.
Fine. See, look, it would be not be right on my part to legislate as to why the farmers are not agreeing to anything short of repealing of the act. But that question that you asked, technically there are about 32, 33 Kisan unions of Punjab itself, and a few of them which are from the other states, and one is the Samyukt Kisan Morcha, which is led by Rakesh Takait, who are the only ones who are inside this. Now, the government has sent this matter to the Supreme Court also. There was a public interest litigation on this thing, where in Supreme Court, there are certain farm unions from the rest of the country who are saying that, look, we are fine with these laws. So the government is saying that if there are some people who are fine with it and some people are not fine with it, so how can we just remove these laws altogether? We can carry out certain amendments and we can carry out a discussion. Democracy is all about discussion. And it's all about negotiation. It's all about seeing how things go further. And like I said, no government in India can survive by going on the wrong side of the farming community. If the entire farming community of India is against these laws, in another 4 years, there is going to be an election and the ruling party will lose.
Right.
Yes, I am sure they are not so silly that they would like to lose just because of a few corporate houses. So they have also given a very big thought to all this and only then done it. So with the result that I cannot legislate as to at what stage, you see, a negotiation is always long drawn. So at what stage the Kisan Union leaders are going to come and agree at a particular mutually agreeable point, I do not know. But I have a feeling that they have already reached that point. Now the problem as far as they are concerned is, you see, Sachin, starting an agitation for any particular organization or any union is very easy. To give momentum is also quite easy, but to stop an agitation is very difficult. Now they have reached a point, they have reached a threshold where asking for anything less than what they were speaking about earlier is going to get their people against them. That, look, we have been sitting here for the last 3 months and we have been suffering, and now you are negotiating and coming down. So that explanation and that point has to be reached, towards which I am sure the government also must be working and the leaders also must be working. And I'm
Fascinating.
absolutely certain that they will reach to a point where there will be a consensus.
Fascinating. So what you're telling me there, Jabins G, is what you're saying is actually, look, there are legitimate concerns. Both of you have said that. The government is responding. You consider them to be fairly maturely, and behind the scenes, these union leaders, of which there are many, so it's not like there is one union representing the farmers. There are well over 30, 40 unions, different unions representing a very wide variety of farmers. And what you're saying is actually they probably have got to some sort of solution that is amicable for all sides. However, now that you've got the momentum, and as you said, the pressure is on now the union leaders to kind of go back to their members and say, we've achieved what we consider to be sensible. Let's all go back home and let's carry on farming. And what you're telling me is that actually that's difficult. That's the reason why they are still sitting on the outskirts of Delhi. In a nutshell, wow, okay, that's fascinating. But let me ask this then. Suppose that these unions continue to say that we heard reports where they were saying that we have enough resources to camp out here for a year in Delhi, just outside Delhi. We'll be here for over a year if we need to be. In that scenario, what happens to the Indian democratic process? In that scenario, what would you say is the spirit of these protesters, or the leaders of these protesters who are negotiating on their behalf? To me, it seems like you've got laws that are democratically installed. You've got people who have legitimate concerns. You've got leaders that are saying, no, revoke them completely or else. There seems to be somewhere, there has to be a give. If there isn't a give, these protests become anti-democratic. They go against the grain of a liberal democracy. Would you say that? If these protests continue on like this, in a stalemate, then somehow the democratic processes have stalled. Jabanji, what would you say to that?
Look, there are many protests which are carrying on for years on end, and this protest also. I mean, you cannot legislate upon a body of people to get back home, in just because something has happened. But I feel that the farmers and the government, they are all very intelligent people. They are all working very hard, and at a particular time, they will come to an acceptable solution. I feel that we have to find a middle path, and we have to see what is good for India. All of us have to go together. And if our Prime Minister has made this kind of a statement that, look, we will, whatever changes have to be brought about in the bills, we will do it. Let's sit down and discuss. Let us see how it works.
Okay.
So I am sure the farmers, they are very intelligent people. At a particular point in time, they will understand what is good for them. And this thing will resolve itself. There is no doubt about it resolving itself. It will resolve.
Okay, wonderful. So, okay, let me just dispel some things, some myths. I think they are myths, but you'll tell me otherwise. So we get statistics thrown at us, all sorts of statistics. So can either of you, maybe Abhijit ji or Jabins ji, whoever would like to come in, can you tell me the magnitude of these protests? Now, let me just tell you some context. I've got an Instagram post that says that something like 200 million people are protesting. 200 million. I've got another one which says something like, 50% of the farmers of India are now up in arms and are revolting. Just give me some numbers here, guys. What is the magnitude of these protests?
I'll just give a point in this. If it had been so big, the government would have fallen a long time back. It is something that 200 million or whatever it is, I mean, even if 1 million is too much, if it comes in, then the government would have fallen. If the government is still there, if things are moving well, we are all sitting at home. We are all very concerned about our farmers. We are very, very concerned about our farmers. We are very concerned about India. We are very concerned about our farmers. We are very concerned that this thing should finish. We are equally more concerned that certain other forces which should not have taken over. You see, what is happening in India is a protest starts. Then after a while, certain inimical forces, they come into the protest. The protest is always genuine. The protesters are always genuine, but then certain people come in and they take over the protest, and then the whole idea of the protest starts taking a new turn. Something of this sort is happening over there also, but these farmers are very, very intelligent. They have not allowed the infiltration to go above a certain level. Firstly, they
Okay.
did not allow any politician to go over there. Now they are not allowing all the other people, the other inimical forces, some of them Khalistanis, and they are not allowing them to derail their protest. They are much smarter than the others who have been protesting all this while. So, but the fact is there, and they are causing problems. We are very sure that it is genuine, and we are very sure that the government is absolutely, on hand as far as this is concerned. And if it was 200 million, then the government would have fallen a long time back.
Right. Okay.
There is no way in a democracy that 200 million can come out on the streets and the government can carry on.
Right. Very, very clear. Abhijit ji, what are the numbers? Tell me about the numbers. What are they?
So it's very curious you ask me that, because we actually did geospatial intelligence on this. We took satellite imagery. Now, I have to tell you, the thing about satellite imagery is our resolution's about 10 meters, and it's quite difficult to count heads. And, you have to guesstimate how many people in a tent based on its how many meters by how many meters it is. And our figures were something at peak. This was about a week before the Republic Day, the 26th of January, the violent events of the 26th of January. And it was somewhere between about 40,000 to about 60, 70,000.
Wait. That's the peak?
That's the peak. In the areas where we were told, the Singh border and the UP border and things like that, all combined, that was at peak. Right.
So you're not even at 100,000. You're not even at 500,000.
At that point of time, no. There might have been a surge to about, say, 100 to 150,000 at most during the 26th January events. But it's pretty much between 40 to about 70,000, depending on how many people can fit into the tents.
I was really expecting you to at least get to like 800,000, a million, at least.
No. Look, I think
Sachin,
like the Colonel said, if it even gets to 1 million, heads will roll in cabinet. I think people don't realize how much you can disrupt normal life in India with 1 million people. They can cause a lot of disruption. They just aren't.
Okay.
I wish I could give you a bigger figure. The problem is I can't. So the Colonel pretty much nailed it when he said, if you're looking at 200 million people, the party, the BJP itself would have probably passed a no confidence motion against the Prime Minister and kicked him out, because they're all interested in their own survival and things like that. It's just
brilliant.
But if you let me go a few more quick statistics.
Go for it, please.
So the first thing is, I want everybody to know that people have been saying 64 farmer suicides since these protests began.
Yes, that's another stat.
Before these farm laws were implemented, the farmer suicide rate was 10,000 suicides per year. That's how many farmers the old farm laws were killing, because they had no option. They would keep getting into a debt trap. It's something called a chakradhari karz, which is very common in Punjab, and it's a cyclic loan. You keep taking loans to fulfill other loans, you die in debt, and most people will just commit suicide to get out of it. So that was a very important factor. Second, one of the biggest unions, and I want people to understand how unions work in India, trade unions, only 5% of India's labor is unionized. Between 2 to 5% is in the organized sector and therefore unionized. 95% of India's labor is outside of union because they're disorganized, they're unorganized, informal sector workers.
Even the farmers?
Including the farmers, yes. So that's very important for us to understand that. One of these the biggest of them, the BKU, the Bharat Kisan Union, roughly translated, that's the Indian Farmers Union. I can show you their tweets. It's there on my timeline. they have now deleted it, but I've taken screenshots of them. They wanted these laws. They tweeted in 2019 saying, we want these laws, we want an end to MSP, we want an end to all of this. And when you show it to them today, they're like, oh, our account was hacked. Yeah, because somebody hacked their account way back in 2019, 2020 to put this thing out now. Third, I think it's very important we understand this, that it's India is a mediated democracy. They have a right to protest. They do not have a right to disrupt. If it continues, and the problem is, like the colonel said, you have a lot of malign opportunists who are cramming on, and this always happens. When you have a people's movement in India, you have all these vested interests that always come, impose their own agendas on top of it, and they just hijack the whole thing. Yeah. And so, the poor farmer gets screwed over doubly, right? They don't get the change that they came for, and they get kind of ostracized or sort of whatever. But just to throw a few quick statistics at you, I just want to show you how much India spends on its absolutely ineffective agricultural system, right? Electricity loss per year, $16 billion. That's enough to build 4 French Areva 2000 megawatt reactors every year. Most of it is agricultural electricity that gets stolen and gets written off because no government has the political will to crack down on electricity theft. Second,
16 billion.
16 billion. That's 4 nuclear reactors a year, 4 French nuclear reactors, European pressurized heavy water reactors every year. Agricultural subsidy per year, $14 billion. Okay. Agricultural imports, because our farming is so inefficient, in spite of having the highest percentage of arable land in the world, other than Ukraine and Poland, agricultural imports, $20 billion a year, right? Agricultural rot of farm produce that we spoke about, $14 billion a year, 1-4. The farm loan waiver, you remember we spoke about these cyclic loans which leads these farmers to commit suicide. Every year, the government, through one scheme or the other, writes off approximately $6.5 billion a year in farm loans alone, to alleviate the suffering of these farmers.
Yeah.
Our fertilizer import, because of these extremely disease-prone, water-hungry crops, is $7 billion a year. All right? Your fertilizer subsidy, now on top of the fertilizer imports, we're talking about a fertilizer subsidy of $9 billion a year. Phosphate fertilizers, which you give it to the farmers, is also causing them cancer. It's causing the cancer to spread through the water tables and things like that. Your total agricultural non-performing assets just for the last 10 years, even after $6.5 billion a year are written off in farm loan waivers, remains at $15 billion. And 90% of your potable water, of your plumbed, piped water, 90% of the water goes into agriculture.
Goodness. I mean, to me, some of these statistics are just not out there. They're not out there in the public domain. Nobody's communicating. I mean, this is untenable.
And do you know how much the total works out to? $101.5 billion approximately every year that the Indian government spends, essentially, that government joke. The government pays somebody to dig a hole at night in the morning and then fills it up. $100 billion is criminal expenditure in a poor country like India. You just can't afford it. And 90% of your water.
Well said. I want thank you for that. That was very striking. One thing I want to move on to are these actors. Jabin's, you mentioned it, but I want you to tell me in a bit more color, please. You mentioned in your opening remarks, there are sectors within the Punjabi community that want this separatist idea of Khalistan, right? And they are also now trying to get behind these legitimate farmers' concerns and turning that into a very, very, I suppose, ugly affair with some of the violence we saw on the 26th of January. But also, and I ask you this question because I think, I don't think people in India appreciate that how much of the Punjabi community here, and let me just say it outright, think that, everybody in Punjab wants Khalistan and all these poor Punjabis are all oppressed and suppressed. you are a colonel in the Indian army. Please tell us, who are these Khalistanis? What do they want? And what is the pulse of the average common man and farmer in the Punjab in reaction to some of these movements?
Sachin, it has been clarified by those farmers who are sitting in the protest themselves that Khalistan is not an option for them, and Khalistan is something that they have never thought of and they will never think of. So, like I said in my opening remarks, for our friends who are living abroad, they have concern for us. My message to them is thank you very much for your concern, but thank you, it is not required. We are very, very happy within India. We are enjoying life, and we wanted to stay this way for all times to come. So therefore, if they want anything of that sort, they want a separate state, they should start looking for it somewhere else. Neither do the people of Punjab want it, nor does India want it. We have got nothing to do with this kind of separatist tendencies, especially as far as Punjab is concerned. That is one point. Now, the second point is we are talking so much about statistics. If the people abroad are so worried about us, then just give me one statistic. We may be having, say, 1.5, I talk in crores, 1.5 crore people over here, out of which they say about 200, 300,000 are marginalized farmers, or 400, okay, 1 million also marginalized farmers, or whatever it is. If they really want to help, I mean, why don't they support those marginalized farmers? I think it is a crying shame for us as Punjabis to have a marginalized farmer whom we cannot support and who has to commit suicide in Punjab. We should be looking after our own people, and we have the capacity, we have the global reach and the money and the means to do that. We should be working more towards building our culture and retaining our culture in Punjab. This is what the people, the diaspora, should be looking at. They need a nice place to come back to. They need a nice place where the children can be proud of. They need a place where they have an identity. So it is that identity they should be building rather than telling them to break it off. I think it is. I think they are doing the greatest disservice to their own selves by doing things like this.
Wonderful.
That is one point.
Yeah, please carry on. Yes.
Second is what Abhijit was saying. You must realize that we have got almost 70 crore farmers over here, and most of them are marginalized, but yet we are a successful democracy. It is because we have been assisting these people. And it is because we have been assisting them that from a country which was importing food grain, we have reached a stage where we've got so many surpluses that Abhijit is talking about. So certain things, certain subsidies that have been given had to be given at a particular point in time, and certain assistance had to be given to bring up the thing. There was a time when only Punjab was producing wheat and rice. Now it is being produced in Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and so many other places. Rice. So we are reaching a particular point where we should be as far as agriculture is concerned, but it is going to take some time and it is going to take patience. And we have to try out new things as we are trying. They may work, they may not work, they may fail. We have to try again and we have to get there. That is my point.
Okay.
But if we are helping farmers, if the government is helping farmers, I am a taxpayer. I'm very happy that the government is helping farmers. I want the government to take taxes from me and help the farmers. They are looking after us. They are the majority in this country. We have to look after them back. And I want the diaspora also to look after all the marginalized farmers of Punjab and see to it that there is no suicide over here. That is what they should be doing, instead of asking us that we become Khalistan and become things like that.
Very clear. No, thank you so much for that. I want to carry this on, and I want to move on to the audience Q&A. We've had a tremendous response, as you can imagine, from the people that are watching. And so some of the questions I'm going to ask you, and some of them I'll pinpoint, and others I will ask both of you to respond on. So one of the questions that's come, and this is a question that's come from several people. So I'll ask this first: is look, it seems like from here that the Indian political class use these seditious movements that are trying to piggyback on these legitimate farmers' protests And the opposition or certain political class of India actually legitimize these seditious forces. Now, is that the case? Number one. If that's not the case, then who is supporting these people from within the Indian borders, within the Indian elite or political class? Who would like to tackle that? Abhijit, Jabanshi, either of you, please.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, Abhijit, go first.
So look, it's the perfect storm where you've had a lot of people who used to be sort of the régime ancien, the old elite, who have now fallen on hard times, who lead a sort of intellectual campaign. The second are the Khalistanis who, have been trying to piggyback. This isn't the first time they've tried to piggyback onto trouble. The first time they attempted it was when almost 1/3 of India was under the control of the Naxal movement. And there was Naxalism spreading in Punjab. We were seeing posters in 2010, 2011. Nothing came of it. They couldn't turn that. They couldn't weaponize that. Then they tried through a new party called the Aam Aadmi Party, the Common People's Party, which rules Delhi. Nothing came of that either, because there's a Sikh general there called General Panag, who's like, boss, we're not doing this Khalistan crap. So that was the end of that. This is their latest iteration trying to weaponize something else. And as much as it works in terms of international propaganda, domestically, it's not taken off at all. The third set of people that you're looking at is different kinds of failed politicians. So there's a gentleman called Yogendra Yadav who keeps starting up
I
parties.
actually saw him on the BBC. I actually saw him come on the BBC and got a grilling. So yes, please tell us.
Yeah. So he's been trying to make a difference in Indian politics for the last 10 years or so. He's failed spectacularly every time, because every time he contests the polls, he doesn't even manage to get 1,000 votes, maybe 2,000 votes at best. And yet he claims to have represent basically every disaffected movement that's cropped up in the last 4 or 5 years. Wherever there's disaffection, he crops up and he tries to become the leader of it. A sort of a prophet in search of a following. Unfortunately, he never gets that following. So you have a lot of people like that. So essentially what you have is a lot of prophets trying to seek a following that they've lost or never had in the first place. And unfortunately, what's happening is, like the colonel said, there are genuine farmers here that the Indian state needs to sit down and, talk to, because they are exercising their democratic rights. Right. The problem is you have all these people coming in and adding their own agendas because they have a vested interest in this turning nasty. Because if they keep telling the farmers, the prime minister is lying to you, he doesn't actually mean that. Like if you've seen Jungle Book, it's what Kaa kind of does. He's Kaa the snake. Yeah. He starts with those crooked eyes and he mesmerizes you and is like, don't trust him, kill him. It's like, my precious, Gollum or whatever. I mean, use whatever movie analogy you have, but that's pretty much it.
Sure.
So it's a lot. The Congress, surprisingly, has actually been a lot more restrained than people give it credit for. It's not that they've not tried to muddle in fish in muddy waters. I got my analogy confused out there. Fish in muddy waters. But the thing is, the Congress has probably the only people here who have a right to do that, because they are the opposition. They are the primary opposition, and it is the job of the opposition to try to unseat the government.
Fair enough. Jabins, do you want to come in on this particular issue with any comments you want to make on this political class?
See, I just want to say this much, Sachin, that when we talk of the numbers, if there is a protest going on in India, there are all these people who are involved, Yogendra Yadav and these people, whatever we have got. You also have this kind in UK, you also have this kind of mavericks all over the place. Now, for us, the maverick population may be, say, 1 billion, but we are 130 billion. 1%, less than 1% is 1 billion. So if 1 billion people are writing about this, they seem a lot to you, but they do not seem too much to us. If 1 billion people, I mean, what is your 1%? What is your 1% if they start speaking? Don't tell me that your 1% is not speaking against the government or having a problem with the systems that are in UK. But what is your 1% and what is our 1%? So in the social media, when our 1% comes into play, you think as if the sky is falling like it used to fall in Asterix comics when I used to read them. But the sky is not falling. It's all part of the game.
And
And
what's interesting
these
about
guys
this?
also, you see, Yogender Yadav and all this lot, if they stop what they are doing, then the fun of living in India is going to finish off. So let them carry on. I mean, Yogender Yadav sometimes becomes a Muslim, sometimes he becomes a farmer, sometimes he becomes an industrialist, sometimes he becomes something. So it keeps us going, trying to find out which persona he has taken at a particular point in time. Sure. And he's also as much a part of India. He has the right to do whatever he wants to do. Let him do it. But we do not take him seriously. I wonder why you people take him so seriously. Let him do what he has to do.
I wonder the same thing, Jabin's. Why do we take these things so
seriously? Let him have his time under the sun. I mean, it's only after 6-7 months that something like this happens. Then he gets a couple of days to stay in glory, and then it's finished. So, like Abhijit said, he cannot fight an election anywhere. Even Rakesh Takayat has lost an election twice, who's now the biggest farm leader. He has lost his deposit 2 times. And next time also, and there is this Kanhaiya Kumar in the JNU thing. It seemed as if he's the god of India, and that is the way he was being portrayed by the media outside. That he's God. Where is he? Nobody even knows his name now.
Yeah.
There is an election going on in Bengal. There was an election in Bihar. He could do nothing about it. There's an election going on in Bengal. He will not be able to do anything about it.
Do you know what's interesting? What's interesting here, Jabin's, if I could just come in. What's interesting about this is when both of you were telling me about the scale, and your point of scale is absolutely right. 1% in a population of 62, 64 million and 1% of 1.4 billion, it's a whole different game. But the one thing I'll say is, I remember, because I was part of this, in 2003, there were the Iraq war protests against the Iraq war. I was there, and even at the lowest estimates, there were 800,000 people at any one time protesting in the United Kingdom, and we still went to war. And so when you then tell me that the highest, at the peak, there were 150 or 100, I just think, sort of, we've lost all proportion in this dialogue, in this rhetoric that we're experiencing in kind of the social media channels and in terms of discussions and all of that. And then, James, your point about why do we worry so much? I think it's interesting. You see, what happens here is effectively we have a very, very progressive, dynamic diaspora. And because we punch way above our weight, we are less than 2%, but we contribute over 5% of the economy of this country. MPs have to listen to us. And so often we end up creating pressure on the MPs to comment on things that the Indian state or the Indian people are just taking it in their stride. The mechanisms of democracy are working in their own chaotic way, and it's fine. What I'm hearing from you is leave us alone, we're fine, we're doing great, and we'll figure our way out of any given situation that comes. And I understand that. I have another question for you though, which is this. If there are so few farmers protesting at this moment in time, where are all the other farmers, and are they therefore in general support of these bills? Can you say that? Or are these majority of the farmers just totally oblivious to what's happening? Where are the other farmers then? Jabin's, do you want to go first?
Look, even if one farmer is protesting, that means that there is a reason to protest. And the farmers, they know what is good for them. They know what is not good for them. So even if one is protesting, there is a reason behind it. And the government has to be sensitive about the reason. And we have to work out a workable solution as far as all this is concerned. But repealing the bills is not the solution. improving upon the system is the solution, and that improvement is not going to come in 1 day or 2 days. You see, look at the amount of improvement which has come over the last 60, 70 years. Every year we improve, like I was telling you just now. So let us not get into the numbers of how many farmers are protesting, and only then the government should react. Even if one is protesting, even if 1,000 or 10,000 are protesting, the government has to find out as to why they are protesting and how it can be changed. And more than that, how can their trust be won, and how can they be convinced as to what the government is doing is right for them. So it is the onus of responsibility lies on the government. So the government has to run a massive information campaign, and the government has to put across its point in a much more vibrant manner to reach out to the people and tell them that no. And of course then we also, the farmers also, have to show some patience and at least let the whole thing work for a while. After all, nobody is taking away from our right to protest. If it doesn't work for a year or two, we can go and sit in the water once more. It is entirely up to us, isn't it? So I feel that let's not get into the numbers.
Yeah.
If there is a protest going on, the government has to respond to the protest. That is why the government is where it is.
And yes, and I understand your sentiment, JJ, but generally in Tamil Nadu, in Telangana, in Kerala, are the farmers there who will also be, these bills will also come into their states? On the whole, have they been generally accepting of these bills? I assume that's a yes.
See, the agricultural practices across the country are different. The agriculture practice in Punjab is not the agriculture practice which is in Kerala. Kerala is not growing any rice or anything of that sort. It is importing rice from neighboring Tamil Nadu. So the agriculture, the products are different, the agriculture practices are different. In some places there is some law which is relevant, in other places there is another law which is relevant. So this is, you look at the laws as a guiding principle which has been given. In any case, agriculture is a state subject. So whether the people want to apply these laws or they do not want to apply them partially or change them, it is entirely up to those people. The government has already said that, okay, fine, if you're not good with it, let us put it into abeyance for 1.5 years and let's talk it out again. So there has to be a receptivity to all these things. And one place is definitely not like the other. Gujarat has got an entirely different model of agriculture produce than Punjab. Even Haryana in two places, one in the Bhiwani area and the other in the Jind area, they have got different agricultural processes. So we have to keep that in mind.
Yes, I understand. I understand. Okay.
Right. So since I am from Tamil Nadu, yeah. I just want to point out, it's exactly what the Colonel said. There's a belt from Andhra, as in, Andhra Pradesh has now been bifurcated into Telangana and Andhra. Telangana is much more arid. Andhra is much more fertile. You have a complete belt, a rice growing belt out there, which produces about 30, 40 different kinds of rice, which are extremely premium rices. They command a very, very high market price. Most of those people there don't depend on the MSP for it at all, right? So it just never affected them. So like the Colonel said, the agriculture, the land holding practices change every 200-300 kilometers. The agricultural crops and practices change every 200-300 kilometers. You just can't standardize this to one thing. It's safe to say that the overwhelming majority of farmers in India, if it's affected them or not, they don't take it seriously enough to be coming out and protesting or joining these protests in spite of all the international narrative that's been built up for it.
Okay, no, that's clear. I have another question here, and I'm going to kind of extend that question because I think it's quite important. Let me just read it and then we can caveat it. It says, and again, a few people have asked this question in a similar format. Many small farmers with unsustainable farms have been struggling. What can the government do to support them, right? Now, what he means by that, I suspect, or what they mean by that, I suspect, is that the reality is that Indian, and I think you mentioned it, Abhijit, in your opening remarks, that the average Indian landholding now is so small that they cannot produce anything of volume or cannot get the yields that they require, and therefore inefficiencies are creeping in generation by generation, and therefore they cannot automate, they cannot invest in mechanization. There is massive underinvestment in Indian agriculture. There's no capital markets in Indian agriculture, all sorts of problems. So here's the devil in the detail. Is this a backdoor way, not now, but in 10 years' time, for larger corporate players to consolidate the land, to create larger farms, which in the long term is probably good for India, but in the medium to short term, it's going to be painful. And this is the thin end of the wedge to allow corporatization of agriculture. What would you say to that? I want your reflection on that. Jay Banerjee, do you want to go first?
See, now on one side, people say that there are marginalized farmers who need to be looked after, and you were quite surprised at the $115 billion that Abhijit was talking about that the government is spending only to look after these marginalized farmers, only to sustain them. So we have a system in place, Sachin, and we are a very old civilization. We are a very large country. We have a huge population. Everything cannot be hunky-dory, and one government in one term cannot do it for us also. Slowly, we have this system of everything going in place very slowly. If we have reached a point where we are slightly better off as far as our farmers are concerned than earlier. We've got more literate people. This will take its own time to go, and whether corporatization is good for us. You see, you corporate a particular land, and after that, what happens is that where do all the farmers go? So we have to find alternate jobs for those farmers also before we start this method of corporatization, which it seems so easy to so many people make a corporate and large land holdings. What will we do with that entire? We have to have the industry, we have to have the work, we have to have so many other things to help those people. So, and the diaspora should be helping them. Like I said, that whoever is the marginalized farmer in Punjab, let the diaspora come and help him to settle himself down. Yeah, that's my point. Let them help us.
Do you want to come in on this, Abhijit?
Yeah, just to add to what the Colonel said, those small land holdings are going to get even smaller because we don't follow primogeniture here. It has to be divided amongst all the children. Right, all the children have to inherit family property. If the father has added that property during his life, it's up to him to give it to whichever one of his children he wants. But family property has to be divided equally amongst all the children. So smaller plots are only going to get progressively smaller. Now there were two ideas that were discussed. One was the Israeli kibbutzim system, which people pool their land, and we have to separate this from Soviet style collectivization, which led to the Holom Dor and things like that. Well, it was one of the reasons for the Holom Dor, amongst others. And on the one hand, and corporates creating a sort of a collation of smaller plots of land. The third option is it just survives on subsistence, that you produce enough, because anyway, these smaller farmers were always subsistence farmers. They'd grow a variety of crops in their tiny plot of land, which would kind of tide them over about 260 days in a year. And for the remaining sort of 100 odd days, they would go on to something called the MNREGA, the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee, where they would go and work on public works projects. They had to be guaranteed a few days per week in a job, and they would get a basic dole, which would sustain them through that remaining 100 days, right? So that particular class of farmer was anyway never going to come in the system. Whatever they could gain from rice was so marginal, they could grow better crops, more diverse crops at home just to feed their family. So there was this whole number of farmers who were just completely out of the system, who we are claiming to defend today, that had nothing to do with these protests.
Right.
Which is why
Understood.
if you actually go interview the farmers out there, not one of them will be from these suboptimal crop holdings. That's why not. Have you actually seen any reporter go interview them, go do a background on what their farm holding sizes are and things like that?
Yeah.
Because if you look at the sort of disposable income of all the people of all the farmers who have been interviewed, they're definitely not the subsistence farmer kinds at the moment.
Wonderful.
The subsistence farmer can't afford to come to these protests.
Understood. Right. Absolutely. Now that leads me on to one of my final questions, and I'm conscious of time, but I think I think we're enjoying this, guys, and I think our audience is enjoying this. So I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and if you will bear with me, take a bit more of your time up. I have a question here, which says, look, some of this political funding in the Punjab, and I think Jay Bridges, you may have touched on this. The political funding in Punjab and Haryana are both largely based on mandis. Are political parties and middlemen fueling the protest? So is this basically a battle for survival for some of the political classes of Punjab, Haryana, etc., etc.? Any of you can please come in on this. Maybe Jay Bridges, if you can. Oh, go on, Abhijit, go.
Yeah, big time. Like we discussed in my opening remarks, because the economic reforms happened in 1991 and terrorism in the Punjab sort of continued till about 97, 98. I think the Chief Minister, Beyant Singh Ji, was killed in 1995, which was kind of the tail end of the insurgency out there. What happens is Punjab missed a whole cycle of industrialization that the rest of the country saw. So these mandis are probably the only source of funding that both parties, the Congress and the Akalis, have in that particular state, which is why both the parties, the Punjab Congress and the Akalis, are opposing it. And that's why the Akalis left the government. Whereas no other state has seen that kind of a reaction.
Jay, would you agree? Would you agree with
Yes,
that?
yes. There is a lot of political involvement and a lot of money involved in all this, in this mandi system and things like that. And if it does break down, it is going to cause a lot of loss to a lot of very rich, very powerful politicians and other very large landholders in both Punjab and Haryana. There is no doubt about that. And the people who, I mean, it is these large landholders and large politicians and powerful people, actually, they are also a part of that middleman cycle, which is known as Artiya. In Punjab, it is known as Artiya. So most of the large landholders are also Artiyas. They have their own they have their own power base in the mandi system from which they are earning a lot of money, and they are getting the best prices for their crops, and they are getting all the subsidies. So obviously they are the ones who are going to suffer the most, and the cycle goes on. There is no doubt about it. The whole of India and the whole of world knows about that. So
Okay,
that's
wonderful.
it.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to have to start wrapping things up. So what we'll do is we'll now reverse it. Abhijit ji, if you can go with your final remarks, 5 minutes, as to what is the message you want to leave the British diaspora, the British audience, the British journalist, the British politician who is watching this, listening to this. What's the message you want to give them in 5 minutes? And then Jabins ji will ask for you to give your concluding remarks too. Abhijit ji, over to you.
I'll wrap it up in one. There's something called isomorphic mimicry, that you assume that the anthropological and sociological conditions that you see in Britain apply to India, or that all of India pretty much is exactly the same. And that isn't the case. You have to understand that if you go to Gurgaon, you will see gleaming steel towers and glass towers and all of that, which is the 21st century. And you go to rural Punjab, you will see the 12th, 11th, 7th century exist side by side, literally about 15, 20 kilometers away. And you can't start imposing a sort of uniformity that you see in the West. You can't transpose it to India. And remember, India, the story changes every 50 kilometers. So what applies to one localized protest doesn't apply across the board. We almost never see that happen in India. It's extremely rare. So keep an open mind. I've also noticed one thing about the press, mostly because I speak to a lot of the press out here, that there's a first mover advantage. Whoever writes the first piece framing a protest one way or another, the rest of the foreign journalists here feel the need to mimic that or echo that, because there's a certain stigma apparently attached to showing up your colleagues in bad light, saying, you know, my say the Financial Times correspondent here can't say that the Guardian correspondent got it badly wrong. You know, it's kind of an omerta code, which is why when you talk to some of these people in private, they'll tell you, look, dude, our hands are tied. This is the narrative, we've got to go with it. So remember, there's a lot of levers out here that you have to play with. Look beyond, because India is never black or white. It's invariably it's 50,000 shades of gray. You have to dig a bit deeper. It's very easy to come up with black and white explanations. It takes a lot more courage and a lot more perseverance to see what's actually happening, the undercurrents.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Jabin's, same thing to you. What would be your final closing remarks for our British audience, our diaspora, our political class, our journalists? What would you say? What would be your final message? 5 minutes, please.
The first would be what has been said by Abhijit. Look, I have also been to UK. I've been to many other places in the world. I really, with due apologies, I don't find them to be too exciting. So as you do not find India too exciting, I do not find Britain also too exciting. But then I live with it, and I'm a little more sophisticated about not talking about it publicly. So I would expect people over there also to learn something from me, and mind your own business and come over here, enjoy yourself, look at our lovely temples, our gurdwaras, Harmandir Sahib, go to our fields, have a look at them. We've got so much of history behind us. Have a look at it, enjoy it. So you try to enjoy India as much as you want to and leave our problems to us. We will sort them out ourselves. We are quite capable of doing that. We have done that for millenniums, much before you even knew what a problem was. And as far as the farmers and the Indian government is concerned, I would say that yes, it's a very serious issue, and it has to be tackled, and it has to be tackled fast. And everybody responsible who's working on it, whether it's the government, it's the Kisan leaders, it is the intellectuals or the media, they should all be running towards finding a solution rather than creating roadblocks onto the solution. We have to meet the legitimate aspirations and the demands of the farmers. There is no two ways about it, and we have to give them the trust. That is the job of the government, that is the job of the nation, and that is the job that we should be doing. And that is my message as a soldier to my country, and that was a very blunt message to your country also, with due respects. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And let me thank Abhijit Mitra and Colonel retired Jabin Singh for taking their time out all the way from India to join us this afternoon, their evening, and actually have a conversation with us about what is happening on the ground to do with India's farm laws and India's land reforms. So both of you, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. What I've heard today has been nothing short of I think, eye-opening. I have quite literally papers, notes, I've got information coming out everywhere. And yet I learned something that I didn't quite appreciate before starting this VM, which was that what it seems to me that is happening is that social media and the media at large, as Abhijit rightly just sort of signposted us to, is that we live in an echo chamber where a certain narrative gets picked up, gets enhanced, gets amplified, and then all of us get bombarded with the same narrative. On top of that, here in the UK, it seems absolutely abundantly clear, to me at least, that there are many differing acting forces that are giving us their information in a filtered manner. We are not getting the information from the ground. We are not getting a true picture of what is happening on the ground. And I think that is important for all of us watching this and listening to this to remember. Vichar Manthan doesn't swing one way or the other, but it is brave enough to bring the toughest questions out in the limelight and discuss tough matters, complicated matters, subtle and nuanced matters with speakers who have the capability to understand these matters, who are at the forefront of understanding some of these issues and sharing their insights with us. I hope each and every one of you has enjoyed this Vichar Manthan. I hope it has been a learning experience as much as it has been for me. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and asking all your questions. I apologize that I couldn't get through many more questions. I did try, but the questions are just unending and relentless. We will try and get some of those questions answered maybe in the future. But thank you for participating. Vichar Manthan is a earnest platform, a Hindu platform to discuss contemporary British challenges. And certainly I can say that we have a challenge here, which is how do we critically make sense of what is happening in other parts of the world, especially India, a country that the diaspora rightly cares about. It has been my pleasure to chair this Vichar Manthan. For all of you who support Vichar Manthan, not just with your time, but also through monthly contributions as being well-wishers of Vichar Manthan, I want to thank you. Your support helps us put together much of this work that we do. You will see a slide which will tell you and help you in how to become a well-wisher for Vichar Manthan. We have a small army of well-wishers who support us. They give as little as £1 to £2 per month and upwards. So if you are not a well-wisher and you'd like to be a well-wisher, please go to our website, look at the link on your chat right now, and go and become a well-wisher. Your support is invaluable to us. We have a small army of over 35 to 40 Karyakartas that are volunteers that up and down the country who help us put together this content so that we can discuss and manthan genuine, earnest ideas. So thank you for your support and please do continue to support us. I want to highlight the VM podcast. We will soon, on the 6th of March, be formally launching the Vichar Manthan podcast. We will have Sumit Sharma with us, who is our podcast chair and promoter. So the VM podcast is a short audio, 30 to 45 minutes discussions on a wide array of ideas, light-hearted, fun, entertaining. So please do begin to explore the VM podcast and join us next week to find out more about it. This afternoon, I will conclude with a namaste and thank you very much for joining us and Godspeed.